Hello Sole, we are F.Araya and Camila Villamor, and we are presenting the second task for TREPE related to a case study. In this case, we chose a case from her school. We are going to explain later the characteristics of the school, the teacher, and the student. We related to differentiated instruction. So first we are going to start with the question, the research question that we are going to use is how can teachers implement instruction diversification on a student with hyperactive behavior? Because in this case, as we are going to explain, this student has a hyperactive behavior, one kind of hyperactive behavior. So first, I'm going to describe the school very quickly. It's Liceo Vicente Vera Rosales, located in Quinta Normal. It's a SOFOFA school. It has around 40 students per class. This is an important topic because it's the traditional classroom amount of students. But anyway, it has a low social economic level background and three important things. One, they have one psychologist and she only attends twice per week. So there is no like a real support in terms of mental health. Another is that they have one psychopedagogist, but not now. It's going to start attending next month. So at the time of this research, they didn't have a psychopedagogist. They only have the psychologist, and they don't have PA, which is really important because this student is diagnosed with ADHD, but there is no treatment because they don't have any resources to attend really this student. And there is a low level of parents' participation, which is going to be relevant for one of the topics that we are going to mention. Now, related to the student characteristics.
Related to the student's characteristics, we have a student, a male student, who is on a 9th grade. He's from 13 to 14 years old. He has ADHD, mostly on the hyperactivity spectrum, and he is always scolded by the teacher. He distracts himself very much. He distracts his classmates also. He also has a lot of negative annotations, and he doesn't really know how to follow instructions because he doesn't listen to them, or when he listens to them, he doesn't do them anyway.
Well, the teachers. The teachers are aware of the condition, but
they don't really do anything to integrate him into the class. There's also this problem in which the school itself is aware of the condition, but as they do not have any mental health support at the moment, they don't really know how to include him into the class. So his parents haven't been asked to meet the teacher privately on a PTA meeting until last month. So this is something fairly new for the school to do and to trying to include a student with ADHD.
Okay, so in terms of the students that this student needs, this teacher is constantly, she's constantly scolding him in a negative way. Only negative feedback, only scolding, no praising. But when she's sitting next to him, he actually works. He distracts other students
as well as himself when he's isolated from the class. So he needs to be distracted at any moment. He doesn't want to pay attention at all, or maybe he can't also.
So what he needs is focus. He constantly needs to focus on something, even if it's not related to anything about classroom. So he's constantly distracting others, himself, and he doesn't work.
Yeah. So we have the methodology and resources first, the setting and arrangement, and this is from 13 to 40 students per class, as it is a SOFOFA school. Students usually are seated into 3 rows, 2 at the sides, 1 at the center, and it's mostly individual work. There's also that is the use of material. They use copybooks, obviously, the whiteboard, they have audio, speakers into the class, but they also only uses the mini books, in this case will be Things in Motion 1. They also have dictionaries, but they are given by the Ministry of Education, and they are in not a very good condition. They are in a very poor condition, so they will not be replaced on a short period of time. They also have Wi-Fi, but this Wi-Fi is only used by the teacher on activity purposes. The cell phones are taken away at the beginning of the class, are given back at the end, so they do not have any access to technology during the class, so for them not to get distracted. And also if each EFL teacher at the school, and also every teacher at the school, has his own or her own classroom. So students tend to change classrooms when they finish classes. So every teacher stays at the classroom, and the classrooms are being shared by all of the students.
Well, we need to pay attention in terms of methodology. Is one that they have only 2 or
3 activities per class, because they only have 2 classes of English at the week.
And they don't have many activities during the class. So that's something that we are going to consider for the strategies. And also that the cell phones are removed, yes. So the student, this particular student, doesn't distract himself with the cell phone. He distracts with
anything he has at hand. Maybe by throwing papers, by yelling, by punching their classmates. By running. Anything he can do to distract himself.
Now, in terms of the interaction that this teacher has with her students, in terms of, in general, the relationship is close but not friendly. The teacher doesn't leave students like intentionally unattended.
But she cannot control all of the class at the same time, because she's only one teacher.
So she doesn't have any full control of the class, but that's something that it can be improved, but which is very complicated for this student.
But it's also common into Chilean reality of school.
Yeah. Now, there are negative annotations, but the thing is that she doesn't tell them
that they are going to get a negative annotation. She does them privately or quietly, so they don't know how many they have. Maybe it's a surprise.
Now, important thing, play. We are going to talk about play later, but play is not common in this class. They don't usually, it happens, but it's very rare. And we are going to mention it because we are going to implement a little game on our strategies. Another thing is that the teacher doesn't change her way of behaving or her methodology. That's something that we're also going to mention in the strategies part, because she thinks that she has to treat everyone the same. And the issue is that they are not the same. And that's something related to diversified instruction. And the other thing that Camila was mentioning that is scolding is collective. She stopped the class and she scolded everyone in general. And in the case of this student, she scolds him in public, and she only does that, so he doesn't receive any positive feedback. It's only negative. In this case, for example, from Nicolai, that says that the teacher believes, in this case, her approach to a student or her way of thinking about a student affects his self-image. So he is going to think that if he only receives negative feedback,
it's because he doesn't have the same abilities that his classmates.
And probably that he deserves it. Now he has ADHD, so it's something more complex than just
being distracted.
Exactly. So now the literature review. First, I'm going to start with defining what is ADHD. So according to we're going to use mostly chat, the site. That it says that is inappropriate levels of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Now, there are many cases of, types of, there are 3 that we found, but we are going to focus on the hyperactivity, impulsiveness type of ADHD, because that's the one that this student has. Some possible causes: genetical inheritance, premature birth, pesticides, brain damage. We don't know because they only have one psychologist and one psychopedagogist. So he was diagnosed, but he hasn't been treated afterwards. So we don't know.
At least into the school.
What possibly caused it, we don't know, and we should know in order to treat him and probably include him
into the class.
Exactly. Now, according to Tucha and some other authors, the predominantly hyperactive type of ADHD has to do with well, it can be manifested through many ways, like for example, excessive attraction to something, boredom, inattention, boldness, risk taking. So it can be in many ways, in most of the ways that he actually described according to, well, along with Zach Bolden, this student has them. So it's only to confirm that he has
the symptoms of a person with ADHD.
Of the kind of hyperactive impulsive.
Yeah. So here we have instruction diversification or differentiation, in which, as Hal tells us here and here, that when you diversify your instruction, you take into account that every student is different and they learn differently. So you need to make a plan, a lesson plan maybe, to know how to approach each of them, to know how you can fulfill their needs as students, and how to make classes that they can manage to follow. They can know how to ask questions, what questions are going to be asked. They can have visual input and also auditorial input. The idea is for teachers to reach all of his students through the way the classroom is done, as every student is obviously different. Also, we have Noonan, in which the categories of the styles, learning styles, are very important for you to know when planning a class and doing a class. First, we have that to recognize different styles in yourself and your learners, also for them to connect with you, to know that you're also a person who learns differently and that everybody has differences, and also to get a lesson plan and classroom activities that addresses these various styles. So you cannot create a lesson plan that only applies to visual learners or to people who only learn by listening. You need to take everyone into consideration, because that should be an inclusive classroom, which is very important, because every classroom should be inclusive for every student there. Also, we have Borja, in which it says that Borja Herrera and Soto and Sanchez will be, by knowing the students, you need to be closer to them to know how they behave, what they think, what their opinions are, how they feel about the classes and the content, and to know how to make classes interesting to them, to motivate them, for them to know that you care about them mostly.
Mm-hmm. So it's important, because this teacher has been with this student, of course, since March, but the relationship is not as close to know how to plan your class for all of them to be included. So going to an action plan. Well, we focus on methodology, content related, and classroom management, and we are going to start with the methodological strategies
and motivation,
specifically in terms of motivation.
Okay, here at motivation we have some quotes by Hammer here and here, in which it says that when you arrive to the class, you should know how to engage your students, how to motivate your students to get included into the class, to participate, to ask questions, to know what they need to do. And for this, you also need to do reports, in which report means you need to talk with your students, get to know your students, to build a relationship with your students, and to know how to approach them, to which part of the content is more important for them than the other, what is interesting to them, for them to be engaged into class, to active in a way to also activate previous knowledge with them. And it should be engaging for them, you should be close to them, for them to also trust you, as students should always trust their teachers into classes. And also we have this quote by Hal, which is that engaging every student is essential, because they are encouraged to strive for developing lessons that can engage. Engaging and also entertaining for students. So it will be engaging and entertaining your students as a way to motivate them.
So basically our strategy in this part will be that students need to be motivated, and that's something that the teacher can do. I mean, what is important to mention is that motivation doesn't only work for ADHD students.
But also for all students in
Yes.
general.
So it's a way of diversified instruction because it's something general and everyone is going to feel
Included.
exactly
Into it,
when
yes.
you are engaged because the teacher makes it engaging. And the other thing about methodological strategies have to do with movement and the lesson stages.
With movement, we have the idea here that by Hammer that the students should not sit every single class and every single hour of every single day at school, but they need to have a moment in which they can move, they can get closer to these classmates, maybe also to engage them into class, maybe to get them out of boredom that can be provoked by sitting all day. We also have this quote by Hammer in which teachers always try to estimate how long each activity will take and to know how to make a class that goes smoothly with the times of each activity. So when planning a lesson, we need to make sure that every activity is going to be as long as we need them for them to follow the class, to do activities quickly, to understand the content, and also to maybe to stand up and move around the class, to do something interactive with each other, something that can get them to move around.
So our the other strategies related to methodology is to have a movement break, not to be moving all the class, but some moments, as my classmate was saying.
In which they can be activated.
And the other is having shorter stages because as we were saying before, they only have like two classes, tasks or activities per class. So maybe they could do more if they have more stages.
Or they have shorter stages and
yes.
shorter activities.
Exactly, for them to always be doing something. In terms of ADHD students, it's really important to be doing something productive. And the movement break or the movement activity is going to be related to that, to having a clear goal towards the content that they have to learn. Now, related to content, first, taking into account that, as Sab Golden was saying, over activity may not be present when you're playing. And that's another strategy that we would like to implement in terms of content, to use games. In this kind of class, they don't usually do.
Play any games at all. It's mostly written work or maybe spoken work, but there's no game into the class that can activate the students, that can make them motivated about what they are doing.
So related to content, they can implement games that can be, not only for ADHD students, but all to be motivated, as we were mentioning the methodological part. And also to have, as my classmate was saying, clear objectives in mind. That you have the class well planned beforehand, and that
with clear objectives that every student
exactly.
can understand and they can manage to develop.
Maybe what happens with this student is that he doesn't understand some instructions. Maybe he's not interested in learning or trying to learn, but maybe you as a teacher can do something but making it more interesting and having it clear. And also having activities that are more straightforward to the content that you are learning, that is related to the content. So that's really fundamental. Some things that Chad says about ADHD students, that some tips that can be useful for ADHD students according to Chad. For example, describe behavior expectations. That is, that the students know
what they are expected to do and what you expect from them as students and as people also.
Yes, to present the objectives in many ways, for all of them to be included. To stick to the plan, not to improvise inside the classroom.
Because it can get students confused about
exactly.
what they need to do.
So you need to be clear, as we were mentioning before. To summarize the activities in the whole lesson visually and verbally, for
and
all of them to be included.
To present objectives in a in various ways, in very different ways in which they can understand them from many points of view.
And finally, related to classroom management, we can say that first, there are three strategies that we are using here. One, taking part into decision making. According to chat also, especially for ADHD students, establishing and practicing rules and procedures with the students is very useful for them, especially with ADHD students, because they feel included already by the teacher. Also, changing the seating arrangement. According to Remen, is fundamental to sometimes you move
around the class and to move the students from the places they already have.
Yes.
So for them to know, to sit with other students, to have different opinions, to get closer to the classmates also.
Yes, and for this student may be very important because he's going to work with other people, but always having in mind that to do that successfully, you have to know them, as we were mentioning before. You have to really know your students. And finally, praising. That's something like related to classroom management, because it's what happens with the teacher is that she scolds a lot many
but
students.
She does very few praises. Yes. So.
Mm-hmm. And when, for example, when he's close to the teacher, he feels that he can work better. So we think that praising for this student it will be really successful, but also for the rest, that to be scolded maybe privately
instead of publicly, and to be praised collectively instead of privately.
So strategies are basically that: changing the seating disposition, making a student take part into decision making, and praising.
Also praising, yeah, as a way to motivate them also.
And so that will be our presentation. This is the references
in which we're going to send to you. We're going to send you the PPT. So thank you for your time, and
thank you very much, for your time.